3rd, 2010. We're talking with Mary Ann Handley at the Manchester Community College. Mary Ann, when did you first begin working at MCC?
Well, I began working officially in the fall of 1966, teaching a part-time course, and then full-time in 1967. Again, in the fall of 1967, I was hired to teach, what was it? History of science. That was the main thing I was hired to do, believe it or not, and then teach some history courses. But I'd actually worked earlier on the referendum to create the college because I was involved in the League of Women Voters, and we were very supportive of it. So I had flyers and took them out in some of the neighborhoods to encourage people to get out and vote for the referendum that established the college in 61, 62 maybe, yeah.
And so obviously you were involved with the college before its inception. What was it like working here in those early years?
Well, it was really pretty exciting. I think the first year as a part-timer, I wasn't very closely connected to the college because, number one, there really wasn't much of a center around which to operate. We were just teaching classes at the high school after 3 o'clock. The women's lounge, the faculty women's lounge was our faculty lounge, and very few people made much use of it because it was a pretty grim place. So it was kind of, you went in and you taught and you went home. Once the Hartford Road building was rented for the use of the college, after the state had taken over the cost of the college and the running of the college, then a whole different atmosphere developed. And I remember the first day arriving in, it would be in probably late August of 67. There was a big room there where we held faculty meetings. It was the largest room in the building. And the excitement and the energy in that room, almost knocked you over. There's always excitement and energy at the beginning of a new year. You know that. Whenever you get started, everybody's happy to see each other and so forth. But it was huge, and everyone was so excited to have a home for the first time, and to be able to be together and meet together. It was quite amazing. And from that point on, it continued to be exciting. I mean, Jim Tatro was my boss. He was the head of the social science department. I think it wasn't divisions then. And anytime I or anybody else had an idea for trying something out, we'd go and talk to him, and if it made any sense at all, he'd say, sure, give it a shot. I do remember one disaster when I encouraged my kids in one class to call the Herald, which was the paper at the time, about checking on some particular data. They were supposed to learn how to find primary sources in history. And the whole class of like 40 students descended on the Herald at one time, and the editor called Jim or the President Lowe, I don't know who, and just raised hell because they couldn't handle it. And I did get into a little trouble for that one. But nonetheless, it was just exciting. It was fun to be able to say, don't you think we ought to do this, or let's try that, or whatever. Yeah.
So who were some of your colleagues you remember from that time period?
From that time? Oh, gee. In the history department was Jim Tatro and Sid Lipshires, who the first year was on leave, but nonetheless was around, Pat Howland, and David Goodman. There were the four of us. And to which was added John Sutherland a couple of years later. And when John retired ahead of me, he was still the junior member of the history department. It didn't change. We were all together for the whole time. Yeah.
Now, you were hired under President Lowe's.
Oh yes, yeah.
What was he like?
Dr. Lowe was a really fascinating guy. I think he had. There was a considerable distance. He was not hail fellow, well met kind of guy. There was always a distance. He was the president, and I was the faculty member, and I think that was true with most people. I can't say 100% because there probably were a few people that he was closer to. He had very definite ideas about what he wanted to do. There was no question about that. I would watch him in a faculty meeting really negotiate the comments and he'd raise a question, what shall we do about such and such a thing? He knew what he wanted to do, and he was waiting for somebody to come up with his idea. I could see it happening, and he would very carefully negotiate things until somebody finally said what he wanted. And then very, very easily, but not completely openly, he would move the conversation into the direction that he wanted, so that ultimately the faculty would agree with him without realizing that he was getting them to, that he was doing the directing. It was an interesting guy. He had a wonderful knack for choosing staff. He wanted the most diverse and politically, socially, whatever, different points of view to be brought together in the faculty, and there were times when it was very clear that when the fights would break out in a faculty meeting, that he would just kind of sit back and watch it happen, because he knew that was what he wanted, was that kind of excitement and dynamic. Yeah.
What are your recollections of the student body during the late 60s and early 70s?
It's interesting, because this was, remember, during the Vietnam War. And so there were a lot of students young students, the students were very much young in those days. The non-traditional students were small in number in the early years of the college. There were some, but small in number. There were an awful lot of young, particularly young men, who were there because they didn't want to get drafted, and so they would stay. They would come to the college. In the early days, and I don't know whether you've talked to Steve Cassano, because he was very much part of this, they were really trying to recapitulate the four-year college experience. There were sororities and fraternities. I was the heaven help us, I was the advisor to a sorority. My son, Michael, who was then 3 years old, was the mascot of the sorority. I mean, it was that kind of thing. They had big dances. We had to chaperone the dances, if you can imagine. And because in those days I was one of the younger faculty, I was often required to be a chaperone. I hated it. But, so there was that kind of attempt. But as time went on and the 60s turned into the real 60s, which really didn't occur until after 1968 or so, then there were some changes in the student body. Number one, there was the growth, and in part because of Bob Manning and some of the other art teachers, there was a growing interest in the arts, including painting and sculpture, but also in theater and so forth. That began to develop. Chuck Please arrived, and so that whole art program, in the largest sense of the word, began to develop. The music program as well. And that attracted a more, avant-garde, shall we say, a group of students who began to challenge the world that they were living in. And they were kind of fun. They had a little place called the Niche under the stairs where they hung out. They put out a newspaper, anti establishment newspaper and so forth, and they were a great fun. One of the kids I loved dearly. He was really a charming guy, and I hired him from time to time to babysit for my son Michael when I had classes or meetings or something. And one day I left them at the table. They were going to have lunch, and Michael wanted, and I've forgotten the kid's name, I'm sorry, but Michael wanted the kid to play war with him, play guns. And he said, okay, I'll play guns with you for half an hour, and then half an hour I'm going to tell you, you have to listen to me tell you why that's wrong. And so they had a great time. It was really fun.
Now, you retired in what year?
I retired in January of '97.
So your career here spanned over 30 years.
Yep.
And what were some of the changes you saw at the college during that period?
Well, one of the changes was clearly in the student body. The great increase in the non-traditional students, particularly as it became clear to women who had stayed home after marriage to raise children that they were going to be needed in the workforce, and they needed to either finish a degree or get some training. So a great increase in the number of non-traditional students, particularly women. And then as the ups and downs of the economy went, there would be non-traditional men also coming in as they saw their jobs disappearing or saw the opportunity to move into a different kind of job. The student body grew enormously. The faculty grew enormously, but never to the point that we didn't all know who we were. I don't think the full-time faculty ever reached the point that we didn't know each other by name and know something about each other. That didn't change. I think the tone of the faculty went through considerable changes. The original faculty were people who'd given up good and secure jobs. Not me, because I was hired for the first time, but gave up good and secure jobs to try this experimental college where we were going to offer college opportunities to kids who'd never had it before, and there was in those early group a real commitment to the mission of the college to make this kind of education possible for everybody. That changed as the college, and then there was the unionizing of the staff, which really grew out of the what we saw as our mission, as our goal, and which we increasingly saw the institutionalizing of life interfering with. So the unionizing was really born out of having to fill out 3 pieces of paper in order to use a room after 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or some foolish stuff like that. And then as the college grew much larger and the student body grew much larger and the buildings grew, the low building and so forth, then I think the faculty who came were more professionally dedicated to the teaching that they were doing, less interested in the mission that we had in the early days seen as equally important as doing the teaching. So those are some of the changes. There were obviously physical changes when we moved from Hartford Road, which was never our building, but which we had the use of, to the lower campus, and then to the low building. And then I was not here for the expansion of the part of the building the part of the campus that we're now in.
Now, when you think about the fact that your tenure here, what are some of the accomplishments you're most proud of?
Well, I think among the things I'm proudest of is one was starting the prison program. I was at my church one day and a life prisoner who was in there for life was talking about his education, that he had been able to finish high school in prison and what a difference it had made in terms of his own personal life, that there was a richer life for him in prison than there would have been. And we were in the process of getting a federal grant, if we could come up with a program to use the money for. So I was, and Dr. Lowe had suggested to all of us to think about what kind of a program might be useful. And so I went to him and said, I think we should offer courses in the prison for those who have either their GED or have high school grad diplomas. And so we did that, and it was a very exciting experience. It's now been taken over by Assununtuck because it made more sense because the prisons are closer to Assununtuck. But I'm not even sure Assununtuck was there when we started it. The daycare center was something that I worked to get because in the days when I was beginning to teach with young children, daycare was a problem, to say the least. The Women's Center, which was important, I think, for, at the time, providing a focus for women faculty and women staff, and ultimately women students. I mean, it became, I don't know where it is right now, but at the time, it was an important center, and particularly as the non-traditional students arrived and found themselves sometimes questioning where they were and what they were doing and so forth. Those were important. I was very proud of the work I did with the Truman Fellowship. We got lots of Truman Fellowships while I was running the program. Of course, they've changed the whole thing now, so two-year colleges can't effectively participate. And I went down to Washington and yelled at them about that. Their office was near where I was staying one time, so I went in and I gave them hell. Told them it was outrageous that Harry Truman would be furious at what they had done. But anyway, we had 5 or 6 Truman Fellows while I was running the program.
Competing against who, Marianne?
Well, we competed against all of the four-year colleges in the state. One year, the woman who was the editor of the paper here, an older woman, often they were older women, won the fellowship, and she was out on the Appalachian Trail in the summer after she had won it, and was in one of those huts with some people, and it just by chance was the advisor to the Truman Fellowship at Yale, and they just got talking, and the woman from Yale said, "We thought we had a winner this time. We can't figure out how you guys won." And she said, but then the MCC student said that the woman was kind enough to say after she met her, she said she could see why she got it. So yeah, we had students. I mean, our students were from. The students we were competing against were Connecticut students who were going to college all over the country.
You've always been active in politics.
Yeah.
And after you retired from the college, had a long career continuing in the state legislature. Could you talk about your activism there?
Well, actually, it started here, I would say, at the college. In fact, I can remember the moment when I decided to, become actively involved was an Earth Day, 1970, when a guy named Joe Duffy, whom some of you may remember, came to speak at the Earth Day celebration. And it was the first Earth Day, I think, in 1970. And I knew he was thinking about running for the Senate as a anti-war candidate. And so I heard him speak, and I went up afterwards and told him that I thought I'd like to work in his campaign. And so as it turned out, I became his campaign manager in Manchester, which everybody thought was just, not going to go anywhere, because the assumption was that Joe didn't win the nomination for senator, but that in the primary that would follow, that Manchester and the rest of the state would go for, I don't even remember now who the other candidate was. But Joe won, and we won in Manchester big. We did very well, and I loved every minute of it. I just loved it. So I became involved as women of my age and position usually were. I did the sticking stuff into envelopes, putting stamps on, that kind of stuff. Leafleting. My kids would go out with me. My kids and some friends' kids would go out on Saturdays before elections and leaflet a neighborhood for a particular candidate. I served as campaign manager I was actually Steve Casano's first campaign manager when he ran for the town council the first time. And then there was after 15 years of active, local stuff, there was a vacancy on the board of directors, and so with the help of some of my local political friends, I got the nomination and won. Lost the second time. In my second run, I lost, which was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to do two things. One, to decide how seriously I wanted to take the business of politics, which I decided I did. I really didn't like losing at all. And then secondly, to learn, I learned I had to, I couldn't rely on other people to, I couldn't make assumptions about other people's support unless I saw them right out there doing the work. So I went very hard to work the next election, became deputy mayor, and then ultimately ran for the Senate.
Now, in the Senate, you're chair of the Education Committee.
Right now, yep.
And you've probably seen the increased prominence and respect afforded to community colleges.
Yes, yep.
Could you comment on that?
Well, it's a fascinating thing. We did a study a few years ago of the people in the General Assembly, in the House and the Senate, who had connections to the community colleges, who had either been students there or taught there or worked in some fashion at community college. The number is huge. It's absolutely huge. There is an enormous reservoir of goodwill for the community colleges in the state legislature. It is not transformed or transferred into adequate assistance for the community colleges. That's been one of my great frustrations. Community colleges compared to the four-year colleges are not well supported, as you know. I mean, everybody knows that. And I think the recent developments in terms of the spending of money by the University of Connecticut and the state universities on really, at times frivolous and certainly other times unnecessary pay increases and so forth. I'm hoping that this is going to lead people to a reevaluation of how the revenue is distributed, and maybe we can get back to become a state that supports the community colleges more adequately than they are right now.
If you were talking to someone who had just been hired to begin his or her teaching career at MCC this fall, what advice would you give to that person?
I think the main thing, and I think this has always been the case here, is to keep your expectations high. Expect the students to do well. Give them all the help they need in order to do well. But tell them this is what you expect, and make sure that they do it. I think this is one of the great obstacles that I notice with students when I taught, sometimes with the younger students, sometimes with the older students, is many of them had very bad experiences in high school and perhaps even in grammar school. They saw the classroom as a battleground with the teacher on one side and students on the other. And to learn that it was a cooperative activity in which our job as faculty is to help them get the job done that they need to do, sometimes takes some work. And I think mostly that has to be the faculty person who does that. And I said by saying you can do it, you're going to do it, I know you can do it, the raising of expectations makes a huge, huge difference.
Any other comments or thoughts that you want to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything that I would want to cover.